Here's the intro.
Well, after this, I'll need some chiropractic support.
You know you didn't have to hold that box the whole time, right?
Yeah, Pep. You could have put it down at any time since Dan came.
Really?
I don't know why I didn't think of that. Shoot, I wish I had known that too. Well, thanks for holding them, guys. Alright, Pep, where do I start with the 2000s Frogger?
Well, since you've already talked about Swampy's Revenge, now you're looking at a real winner of a game.
Ah, crap. Alright, let's get this over with. Frogger the Great Quest is hard to describe. Not in terms of gameplay, but I question how the game turned out like this. This game has been reviewed on the Dang It Show, but like Frogger 2 Swampy's Revenge, it's been so long I'm still gonna go over a lot about it. It was released in November of 2001 for PS2 and September of 2002 for PC, in North America only, I think. For the PC version, I mean. There was also a GBA version of the game released in May of 2002, but we'll get to that later. When the PS2 version was released, it was met with pretty much negative reviews from both critics and fans. They didn't give it the lowest possible scores, but they were bad. The only ones who really enjoyed this game were kids that haven't played that many games before or just didn't know any better. I was one of the latter. But enough talk on the talk screen. Let me show you what the game is like. Well, here we go. The story begins with
Hello, Frog.
whatever Lumpy said. So this is the first appearance of Lumpy. Poor soul. Frogger is pretty much bored of his life at the swamp and wants to change things up.
And quit getting needled by that mosquito gang.
Frogger overhears these kids talking about the story of the Princess and the Frog and gets ultra horny and decides he wants that. Soon after, he sees a shooting star.
I wish I may, I wish I must find a princess before I bust.
Sheesh, stay patient, Frogger, good lord. A fairy frog mother comes along and grants Frogger his wish and sets him off on his Great Quest trademark. And here it is, folks, the first ever Frogger 3D platformer. With freer movement, I mean. Almost immediately, you can feel the problems with this game. To get one compliment out of the way, the game does have nice visuals for a 2001 PS2 game. I mean, don't get me wrong, there were much better looking graphics on the PS2 that year. But still, they look decent. Now that the positives are out of the way, let's talk about the game itself. The movement feels alright, but when you're trying to platform in this game, you'd better hope luck is on your side. Precise platforming is hard to do in this game. It feels like you can slip and slide on just about anything, which can get quite annoying. And it feels like you either overshoot or undershoot your jumps. You do have this glide move where Frogger inflates his croaker, something that feels dirty when saying for some reason, and he floats down. The combat in this game, yes there is combat, it sucks. When you're far away, you shoot at enemies with Frogger's spit. When you're up close, the melee attacks... oh boy. Like, it works, but sometimes it's hard to tell if you're actually attacking the enemies. This alone just shows how unfinished this game is. One new thing they finally introduced, for the first time in Frogger history, Frogger can swim. Don't think about 3D. But yes, our frog boy can swim now. And it sucks. Just think of some of the worst underwater controls in video games, and you have a good idea of how this feels. The only good thing I can say is at least when they remembered that frogs can swim, they also remembered that they can breathe underwater too. Those are the basics of the gameplay. As for the other stuff, they ain't much better. Most of the characters look really ugly. I can tell what they were going for with the artwork, something you can buy in the shop, which is what the coins are for. But man, it did not translate well into 3D, at least not for 2001. Not every character looks bad, but most do. The voice acting, it all depends on which character it is. The fairies are very annoying. Most of the other voices are fine enough, but I really wanted these fairies to die a horrible death. This isn't just because of the voice acting, but that's one of the big reasons. This was talked about a lot when I did, or the Dang It Show did, when reviewing this game, but I'll make it brief. Someone was obviously on some seriously psychedelic drugs when making this game. Not only for some of the design choices, but There's just a lot in this game that shows that you don't have to do acid or mushrooms yourself to feel like you're doing acid or mushrooms. The sound effects are okay, but man, they are just all over the place and usually much louder than they need to be. The music, it's alright. Some tracks are better than others, but it's fine overall. One thing I forgot to mention about the gameplay is that you have these magic stones you can use. They're kinda your basic stuff, such as fire for attacking, one that makes you run faster. It's just various things to make the game easier. But wow, did they make this game a slog to get through most of the time. Some levels are more straightforward, but there are a lot of levels where it can be very confusing on where to go. Sometimes you have to find a certain item or items to progress, but the controls just make things worse. And some are a slog simply just because it takes forever to get through. Especially the last level. Dear Lord in heaven above, this level takes a long time. But once you make it to the last area, you fight the final boss, where the princess and the fairy frog mother are being held. After defeating him, you save the princess, she kisses Frogger, he sadly becomes a human. Everyone is celebrating in their own weird ways. There's a teaser for a sequel that never came, and the game ends. There are no other modes, and the only thing there is to do outside of playing the story is collecting the artwork. If there is anything else, I didn't care to check it out. Don't know if you could tell this, but I was not a big fan of this game. I could see the potential for this game, because it was not a bad idea. It was weird for a Frogger game, but I could see myself enjoying this game if it was executed in a much better way. But as it stands, this game sucks and I would not recommend it to anyone who's not a hardcore Frogger fan. I have played worse, but that doesn't stop this one from being bad. I haven't played the PC version, so I don't know how I'd feel about it, but since it's like the PS2 version, I can't imagine it's any better. But I have played the next version I'm about to talk about. Let's now take a look at when the game came to Game Boy Advance. This version was titled Frogger Advance: The Great Quest. Vicarious Visions made this one, so that's a good sign. They're well known for making the GBA Crash Bandicoot games, as well as Nitro Kart and the Insane Trilogy. They've made other good games too, so that's why it's a good sign. This game basically has the same plot. Frogger wants a new adventure, he's horny to meet the human princess, etc. Now obviously, due to this being on GBA, they went with a 2D plane route. So it's the same game, but as a 2D platformer. The graphics are similar to Donkey Kong Country, in which the characters are 3D models as 2D sprites. The cutscenes come in the form of these screenshots from the PS2 game and some original screens. It already feels much better than the PS2 version. Not because it's 2D, but because it feels way more finished. You have some of the basic moves from the PS2 version, but they feel much better here. Only things missing here are the Power Stone things and Frogger spitting. But they got replaced by this little stone you can use to stun enemies. You can use the stunned enemies as platforms, so that's neat. At the end of each world, you do get a new move, or an enhanced version of a move. As for the sounds, well... yeah, not too great. It all pretty much sounds bit crushed, but the coins are the worst. It is a little funny when you try to eat bugs for health when your health is full. Frogger will say,
But I'm not hungry.
and I don't know, it's charming. That's pretty much where all the voice acting comes from, certain actions from the characters, mostly Frogger. The music is fine, it's just shorter, possibly remixed versions of the tracks from the PS2 version. Bruiser just played through the PS2 version and he will never recover. This game kinda follows the Sonic Advance 3 logic. Well, actually this one came out first. Anyway, what I mean is there are 3 levels per world with a boss level at the end. And unlike the PS2 version, all these levels are linear. Well, almost all. There are a couple that have kind of a maze, but they're not too bad. So far, this seems like a much better version of the game, so it must be good, right? Well, not really. It's not a bad game, but it still has problems. There's the audio, like I said. There's also the fact that this game is extremely short. Like, this game only has 4 worlds altogether. So that's only 12 levels and 4 bosses. The levels aren't that short, but still, that's just 12 levels. So to compensate, this game doesn't have a save feature. Instead, we have just passwords. Now, there were quite a few early GBA games that had a password system, so it's not too surprising here. But still, I feel like they could have had at least one more world here. Though, given the rush job that was the PS2 version, I imagine these guys didn't have a lot of time either. So if I learned that there was meant to be more to this game, it wouldn't surprise me. But despite all that, I still find this game to be alright overall. Nothing great, but it's a big improvement over the PS2 version, though that's not that hard to do. I have played much better games than this, but I still found this game to be alright. It's on the short side, but I suppose that's good for a car ride somewhere slightly far away. So I would recommend this version over the PS2 version, but not over many other Frogger games.
Ooh, Lord. At least that one was over with. Now on to the good stuff with the next game.
Yes indeed. Frogger's Adventures Temple of the Frog was released on GBA in November of 2001, around the same time as the PS2 version of The Great Quest. This is why the art style is basically the same on the cover. This will be a reoccurring thing for later games. But this is a much different game than The Great Quest. Why is that? Well, let's take a look and see. This game's audio was licensed by Factor 5 on their contracts. This game is much different from The Great Quest because it sticks with Frogger's normal gameplay. You know, stuff like hopping in 4 different directions, but there are additional moves, including the tongue move where you grab extra lives. You also have the super hop, which is like the double jump from Swampy's Revenge combined into one hop. And actually that's it. Well, you can turn Frogger in different directions by pressing the L or R buttons, but that's about it. Anyway, this game kinda follows what Frogger 2 on Game Boy Color did, in which you have to get through the level rather than rescue frogs. Although you do still have to find certain items to finish the level. You have to find these orbs, but they're usually on the main path, so they're not that hard to find. The first level of each world has you find 3 orbs, while doing some platforming and dodging hazards and enemies. The second levels are the same, but you have to find 5 orbs. Despite having the same theme as Frogger the Great Quest, it does still stand out with its own themes for the worlds. The first world has you going through the Goblin's land called the Goblin Caverns. The second level has you going through a cave. After 2 levels there's a boss battle. The boss battle here is a giant goblin. You just have to press the right buttons in the right order, so it's not too bad. The second world is the Snake World, which is called Ancient Ruins, but it's a snake world. This one has you going through a jungle with pyramids and such. If you're wondering about the coins, they come in handy later on. They might also give you extra lives. Maybe, I don't usually pay attention. Anyway, after making it through, the boss is this giant snake. Dodge his attacks until these buttons come up, then press them to electrocute him. Wow, damn, that's brutal. The floor changes up every time you attack him. Once we're done with that, we go underwater to SeaWorld. Did I just say SeaWorld? SeaTown is what I meant. SeaTown. But while you're technically underwater here, you don't swim around. So it's not as big of a moment as when you got to swim in The Great Quest. Well, since Frogger is underwater, he has an air helmet on. This is seawater, so it makes sense. But I mention that because now Frogger can't use his tongue move. It's all good though, cause you can also hop on the butterflies to get the lives. Well, after you get past all the sharks and crabs and eels, you face off against this giant shark. All bosses in this game seem to be giant. But instead of fighting the boss, you have to watch out for him. The real challenge comes from pressing these buttons. See, you have to break these ropes by pressing each of the same button, but they're on opposite ends of each other. And while doing that, the shark will come by and deactivate the buttons. Or activate them, I guess. I don't know, it's something to do with the ropes. The annoying part is having to find the right whirlwind portal to get to the right sides. It's not too challenging, but can still be annoying. The next place is Sky City. This place has flying carpets and dudes with swords and these. I found this amusing glitch with the music. If you pause it at the right time, you can make this happen. Fun times. Speaking of music and sounds, they're definitely better in this game than they are in The Great Quest on GBA. A lot of the music does sound samey, but it's still decent. The boss for this world is a jewel thief, and you have to collect more blue jewels than him in time for 3 rounds. It's one of those sometimes hard, sometimes easy challenges. The boss can't kill Frogger, but he can stun him for a couple of seconds. After that, we head to the last world of the game, Temple of the Frog. Remember those coins? Well, you have to pay this guard a certain amount of coins to get through. While this is a cheap, last-minute grind moment, it's honestly very easy to get the amount he wants throughout the game. This temple has what you'd expect in a frog temple. You know, spikes, closing walls, dudes with axes, slugs, ghosts, platforms. There are also these statues of bipedal Frogger. So is this Temple of the Frogger then? Does this take place many years after the Great Quest and we're actually using Frogger the 50th? These levels are relatively challenging, but not too hard. They are fun enough. Now we've reached the final boss, the freaking Grim Reaper himself. He goes by Mr. D, but we all know what that means. Death, guys. Although he looks a lot like a frog. So this might be the best fight in the game. You have to dodge all of his attacks from various elements. Then, while you have time, you collect these orbs. After getting through all of these elemental attacks, there's a next part, because of course there is, it's a final boss. This time, you fight him head on, and press buttons. You have to press this middle button, and then whatever element comes up, you have to make sure he's on one of the panels. Then you press that button, and that attacks him. After beating him, he says, "You haven't seen the last of me, Frogger." And that was the last time we ever saw Mr. D. Frogger goes home to celebrate with his friends I completely neglected to talk about. You know, Lumpy. And the turtle. Credits roll. And that's it. That's the game. Nothing else to it. Remember how I complained about GBA Great Quest having only 12 levels? Well, this one only has 10. It has one more boss than GBA Great Quest, but this game is also very short. If you know what to do, you can beat this game in less than an hour. But despite that, I still found this game to be better than Great Quest GBA. Despite how short it is and lacking in content, I still like this game. Definitely not up there with the best Frogger games, but it's not far down either. So I would recommend this one, partially because it's usually very cheap, but also because it's good. 3 down, many more to go. What's beyond this point, Pep?
Funny you should say beyond.
Well, back to the not very good stuff.
What do you mean, mate?
You'll see. Frogger Beyond was released in December of 2002 for GameCube and Xbox. Then later came out in March of 2003 for PC and June of 2003 for PS2. Not in North America. Due to that, I didn't have this game growing up, so I don't have much of a nostalgic connection with this game. Why it never came to PS2 here in North America, I have no idea. Anyway, so what do I think of it as an adult? Well, let's check it out. Well, this is some upbeat music. It almost sounds like we're about to hear some rap, but surely that's not. Well then, for some reason they found it necessary to have cringe rap music. Moving on.
You know what, Lumpy?
What's that, Frogger?
I never thought I'd be so happy to see this place.
That animation is a bit weird. They went for this slight cel-shaded look for the graphics, but the animation for these scenes are odd to say the least. This is also where they decided to make Frogger a kid, or at least give him a kid voice.
Yeah, but I've been to tons of places. I'm tough now. I'm large. I'm the biggest frog in the swamp.
I still don't see why companies still think that kids just want to see kids do things in games and other media. Anyway, the story now takes place after Temple of the Frog, instead of the Great Quest. For obvious reasons. Frogger's big boy birthday is coming up, and he's looking forward to it.
Some birthday party.
Funny thing about Frogger in this game onward is that he's voiced by Kathleen Barr, the same one who voices Kevin from Ed, Edd and Eddy. I'm not going to be able to unhear a younger Kevin with Frogger now. Anyway, let's move on to the training area. Please don't look at us like that, Lumpy. So I thought my disc was messed up when I was playing through this level, since there's no music. But it's fine, there's just no music in the training level. So as you can tell, they went back to basics with the gameplay. It now plays like the GBA games. Only this time, you have a few new features. One of them being where you hop upward to grab things, such as coins. One thing that did kinda carry over from Great Quest are these special power moves. They aren't the same as in that game, but you get the idea. One gives you the power to hop faster. Another basically gives you the feeding frenzy ability from Swampy's Revenge. And the last makes you invincible to enemies and certain hazards. Of course, these are all temporary and you only have a limited number of them. After that, Frogger hops into this great place known as the Elder Council. Dang. Unfortunately, the disc really was messed up. Well, anyway, here in this hub world, I guess, is where we enter levels, save the game, and go to the item shop. Here's where you can buy the items and extra lives, if you have enough coins. So let's go into the first official level. Ah, that's more like it. Music. There are 3 levels per world, as far as I can remember. I'll go ahead and say right now, I didn't get far with this recording. No, it's not because I didn't want to. Well, okay, that is the reason. But that's because this game is hard as balls. Not in a way where it felt like it was my fault most of the time, but because this was not a very well made game. It is way more finished than the Great Quest, but I mean with enemy placements and mechanics outside the normal gameplay. While I don't have much footage of them, there are mini-game type levels or levels with that stuff. They do not function that well. I did get pretty far when I played the GameCube version, but that's only because I had cheats. Even then, it was still unfairly difficult. At the end of each world, there are bosses. Well, the first one isn't too hard, but it goes on way too long. Also, no health bar, so that makes it feel longer. I just didn't like the way they made these levels, and there are way too many things that can kill you. Which is sad because this game looks and sounds nice. The graphics are nice for a 2002 game, and the music and sounds are fine. The gameplay itself is also fine, but everything else just bogs the game down. So, sorry folks, there's not much more for me to say. There is a time attack mode, but that's about it in terms of extra modes. And that's all I've got to say. I don't know how I'd feel about this game if I played it as a kid, but as it stands, I was not a big fan of this game. It's just too stressful to get through the levels. Though it is better than the Great Quest and is pretty cheap these days, at least on Xbox. So if you were curious enough to try it, I'd say give it a go if it's not too expensive. Sorry I couldn't give a better review of this game. Honestly, if you want a fuller review, watch Nitro Ride's video on it. As for me, I'm moving on.
Frogger!
Hey, what is this? Metal Gear Frogger?
Oh, that's why. Yeah, disappointing really. Well, perhaps this next one will be better. You know, I bet it just might be. Frogger's Adventures 2: The Lost Wand was released in November of 2002 in North America for GBA. It's a sequel to Temple of the Frog but takes on the art style of Frogger Beyond for the cover. But like Temple of the Frog, it may share the same art style as Beyond, but the story is completely different. This feels like it could have been its own storyline entirely, even separate from the first Adventures game. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's look at the game, shall we? Whoa now, you're giving me too many options here. What a shift. Now, as you could have predicted, I won't be looking at the multiplayer, but I'm glad there are extras in this game. So the plot of this game is, while Frogger is trying to have a relaxing day, weird magic tricks start happening. We soon get our answer from this guy who comes out of Frogger's bathroom mirror. How long he's been in there? Well, might want to keep the police in mind, Frogger. So this guy, who calls himself Hocus, says he needs help with his world he's the ruler of, Magic World. He needs all the magic shards. Frogger agrees to help. I mean, if he didn't, we wouldn't have a game, so... Then we start the game on the Jungle Island and Jungle River. The gameplay is pretty much the same as the first Adventures game. Only this time, Frogger's tongue seems to reach out further. And instead of coins, you get these little blue balls. Grab so many and you get an extra life. Of course, you also have separate items to give you lives as well, in the form of these little frog heads. What's a little interesting is that the checkpoints can be activated more than once. I don't know, I thought it was interesting. What's also new in this game are these cards. There are 4 in each level. If you get all 4 and reach the previously locked portal, you'll be transported to a place with many blue balls and lives. Collect as many as you can within the time limit without dying. It's a neat reward. We reach the end and we get a life in a weird way. Basically, it's easy to get lives in this game. The next level is Trampoland. Alright. It's this ancient ruins looking place. The main gimmick here are these trampoline type things that jump you over 2 tiles. Gotta watch out though, as the wrong ones or the wrong places to jump will lead you to your death. And like the previous game, each world has 2 levels and a boss fight. Dozy Dragon is an epic fight of having to keep the dragon asleep. But these birds keep trying to caw! So you have to slap them with your tongue to keep them quiet.
For good.
After beating the boss, the dragon turns out to be a regular lizard or salamander or something. And we get the fire shard, which is what caused it to become that way. That world was fine enough as a starting world. Next we head on to the Snow Island, starting with Snowy Peak. They put a little too many snowmen here, but otherwise it's a fine level. You may have noticed that the graphics are more cartoony here than the last game. I mean, Temple of the Frog looked cartoony, but this one is even more so. With the designs, the animation, the sound effects, etc. Whether that's a good or bad thing is up to you. I personally think it looks good, although Frogger looks a bit weird with the way his cheeks puff out. Ice Mines is pretty much what it sounds like, a mine with icy stuff in it. As you can imagine and, well, see here, the gimmick is making it across parts of the level while riding minecarts. Don't forget anything, because if you do, you'll either have to ride the carts again or you'll have to start the level over. But it's not a big deal if you don't get everything, because all the collectibles really just lead to lives. The boss for this place is a giant snowman robot thing called Frostbite. This battle is done by pulling these bombs into these pits. Once he's done throwing them, you have to hop on the fire shards that appear, thus attacking him. Do this 2 more times and you'll beat him. Just hope you're quick enough and can avoid pits. At the end, we save the seal and get the ice shard. After the freezing cold, we then head to Volcano Island, starting with Lava Temple. Wow, the water in this place has a very interesting look. This is when the game gets a little harder. Seems to be more hazards in the way. Magma Cavern is also a bit difficult, but you also have to be pretty patient. The game's soundtrack is a bit on the weird side. Each track has similar sounding instruments, but they all stand out enough. They're just on the weirder side compared to the previous one. But I will say, this game does sound better than Temple of the Frog. The boss for this place is Fiery Guardian. This one is a little on the annoying side. You have to hop on these moving platforms, but you have to be out of the way when he breathes fire or pulls lava. To attack, you have to jump on these ice shards. After beating him, no one was inside or changed back. That was a straight up guardian we murdered. Hocus is like, "It's all good, bruh, let's move on." So when we do move on, our next destination is the Haunted Island with Path Through Town. What a creative name. I have yet to play many Castlevania games, but I imagine they took some inspiration from them to make these levels. The music is pretty awesome here. There's also randomly a secret area here, which this game doesn't have much of outside of the ones the 4 cards unlock. Creepy Castle, as the name implies, is kind of confusing. What? Don't worry about it, Pep. It's kind of a maze-like level where there are multiple rooms and multiple doors. You have to try and find the right way to get through the level. If you don't know where you're going, it can take a long time. There are a couple of puzzles here to spice it up a bit, but man, what a sort of annoying level. The boss for this level is Fright Flight. Okay, I don't think these are always the boss names. Here is where you fight the straight up Grim Reaper. Again. But it's not Mr. D. Like I said, this game feels like it can be its own thing. Basically, just watch out for the Reaper and his scythe until the light shard comes up. Then take the shard and walk on these tiles around the Reaper to attack. This guy can be pretty quick, so watch out. After that, we find out it was this innocent looking squirrel. Ah, I love this poorly aged joke. Well, since I like this game, I should call it a time capsule. The last world to go to is the Future Island, beginning with Technopolis. Well, we already start off by making the joke about Frogger confusing computer bugs for actual bugs. This is quite an annoying part to go through. Though by some miracle this time, I made it through pretty easily. But even still, Frogger games have this problem of adding too many hazards in one area. Like, there's a pattern here, but because of how many enemies there are, it's hard to keep up with the pattern. But luckily, that was the worst of it. Most of the level is just trying to jump at the right time, whether it's these moving platforms or moving vehicles. Digital domination has you going through this very orange level to get to the end. Something about this level, the look, the music, and everything just gives me sort of a weird feeling. I'm sure there's some scientific reason, but I don't know what it is. Anyway, it's not a bad level. It's not too easy or too hard. As for the last boss of the game, Short Circuit, is just Simon Says. Just hit the right notes at the right time and you'll do well. I am not too good at these, cause there is a point where it goes too fast and or has too much to memorize. But after a while, I did beat the robot and got the last magic shard. Although, we're not quite done yet. Hocus restores the magic shards, but as it turns out, he was evil all along. The guy we saw in the intro was the evil Pocus, who was with us throughout the adventure. So now we've been sent to Magic World, where we meet the real Hocus, who has a more traditional wizard hat rather than a magician hat. After learning about why we were sent to get the shards for Pocus, Frogger must now navigate through this weird magical world. This is quite an interesting place, and it's a fine enough level. Although there is this very annoying part where you have to be quick and pray that the animation will be fast enough. Cause you have to jump on this platform that makes you fall if you stand on it too long, while having to pull this other platform over. That's another problem with most Frogger games. Anyway, once you get through the level, we now move on to the final boss, Pocus. Now this final boss is basically just a more dangerous version of that card game where you have to match 2 or more cards. But it makes sense here considering we are facing a magician wizard guy. This is one where you have to match 3 to attack Pocus. But if you get one wrong, the one you selected will set off some hazards. Except for the tree, which gives you the opportunity to collect lives. One of these will have Pocus in it, so you'll have to watch out for that. After defeating Pocus, he returns to normal and both him and his brother Hocus send Frogger home. Well, after he gets sent home, the weird magic stuff comes back. The brothers are now just teasing him. It's funny, but I feel for Frogger here. He just went on this long journey to help the world. Give him a freaking break, guys. But yeah, that was Frogger's Adventures 2: The Lost Wand. I really rather enjoyed this game. It's not perfect, it has some pretty annoying moments, but the positives outweigh the negatives, and this is one solid Frogger game. It's still slightly on the short side, but it's longer than the previous games, so I would definitely recommend it.
There you go, another good one.
It is refreshing.
And this next one is also an adventures game not for GBA.
I know which one you're talking about, and it's also a good one. Spoilers. Frogger's Adventures The Rescue is the only adventures game to come out on consoles instead of GBA. It was released in October of 2003 for PC, PS2, and GameCube. Strangely, it wasn't released on Xbox, but Beyond wasn't released on PS2 in America, so I guess it evens out. I'll explain later, but this is like a weird mix of being the last game in the Adventures Trilogy, but is also the middle game of what I call the Firefly Swamp Trilogy. But enough talk, let's play the game! I grew up with the PS2 version of this game, but I played the GameCube version for this video. Well, this menu screen is alright. Simple, nothing special, but gets the job done. We start off the story with Frogger sleeping on his bed, maybe? This will be a reoccurring thing.
Lumpy!
Frogger!
Lumpy gives Frogger a gift, in a way you give a gift to a little kid.
I brought you a special little something from my trip. Here you go.
But Lumpy wants to see that Frogger hasn't been slacking off the entire time he's been gone. That's the excuse to move on to the training area. Thankfully in this training area, we don't have creepy-faced Lumpy like in Beyond. I gotta say right away, these graphics are very 2003. Not at all saying it looks bad, they do look quite nice. It's just 2003 had a very particular look to many games from the time. The gameplay is mostly the same as Beyond in the GBA games. Kinda feels like a mix of the two. A couple of new features to the gameplay are these new moves you can pull off with Frogger's tongue. You can push or pull certain objects. You can also grab these little poles to pull Frogger over to it, crossing certain gaps. One move that has been taken away is hopping upward. Not really sure why, but it's not like it was a super fun move to use anyway, so might as well drop it. Now don't get my hopes up, game. We see Frogger peacefully sleeping with his new gift. Lumpy quietly leaves and everything is calm and... Frogger goes outside to see that Lumpy is not feeling too good. I'm assuming the big ship crash has something to do with that, but that's just my guess.
I'll be back to normal, right?
Dolly Parton Frog here informs Frogger on how he can help out Lumpy. Now we officially start the first level. Firefly Swamp, the name of Frogger's home, is where we start out at. It's all grassy, we have lily pads, some bugs, some rocks, and a giant catfish. Yeah, occasionally you'll have these big things that chase you in certain levels. This is the catfish on the cover. I guess they didn't want to spoil too much. This part in Firefly Swamp really shows how slow the game can be sometimes. Like, Frogger can hop at a decent pace, but good lord. This part isn't too bad, but there are a lot of moments of certain events having to slowly play before you can move on. Really breaks the pace of the game. Anyway, in level 1 we learned about the organization known as FIRST, Frog International Rescue Support Team. They're the good guys, which Beauty, the one who's helping Frogger out, is part of. Well, in level 3 we learned that the enemies are called Trip, Tyrannical Reptiles in Power. They are responsible for all the kidnappings in the game, and we have to go rescue them. Oh hey, playing through this game, though a bit slow, does feel better than playing Beyond. It's not a massive improvement, but it just feels better to play. Well, after 3 levels, we reach the first boss, the giant catfish from earlier. To defeat this guy, we have to pull this rock over to this catapult thing and jump on the button to launch it. Simple enough, but you also have to avoid his mustache attacks and water drips. Frogger, you pansy. Thankfully it shows how many hits are left on the side. It might be a little challenging for beginners, but it's not that hard. After defeating him, the cutscene shows that we found Mechanic Frog, who helps restore Firefly Swamp. Though to help Lumpy out, Frogger still needs to find Dr. Frog. But before they can discuss it, someone by the name of Dr. Wani comes up on screen. He informs them that his team at Trip plan to execute Dr. Frog in 3 hours. So then Frogger becomes an official member of FIRST and we move on to the next area, Metro Mayhem. This is the city world that's present in most Frogger games, or at least has a road with moving vehicles. The whole world sees you climbing up a building. At least that's what it feels like. The 3rd level has you trying not to be killed by this giant, solid chocolate wrecking ball. That's how I saw it as a kid anyway. The boss here looks like something from a toy line. What you have to do to defeat it is, once it spits out these gears, you have to place them in the right place. You have to get them all while dealing with its attacks and minions. This demonstrates how slow the animation is for Frogger pulling stuff. It wouldn't be so bad if it didn't lock you for a couple of seconds. And even after the animation's done, you're still locked for almost a second. Yet you're still vulnerable to enemies and hazards. I know I'm talking about seconds, but in these moments, it can feel longer. This is not the worst of it, but it can be bad. But thank God the gears stay in once you've got them in, even after you die. Frogger rescues Dr. Frog, but the building starts to crumble at the top. Luckily, 2 of the escaped FIRST members and Beauty come to help out. Ranger Frog helps Frogger, while Ninja Frog helps Dr. Frog. These have got to be the agent names and not their real names. Well, later in the scene, we're informed where Army Frog is, and now we're headed off to help him escape the Molten Island. This is our lava world for the game, and it's almost purely lava and rock, with a touch of machines. But looking around, we see that there were living beings here, and if you skip the dialogue, you might think that these people died or something. Well, they've been rescued because this is a kids game that would probably still get an E rating even if it were ever re-released.
Frogger, we're counting on you.
But apparently people have been kidnapped because they're trying to find the key person to activate the ultimate weapon. Army Frog will tell us more once we've rescued him. But before we do that, we must battle this robot dragon. This has got to be the easiest battle in the game, possibly even easier than the first. All you have to do is sit on these buttons until the water fills up, and that attacks it. Sure, you have to dodge it and its attacks time to time, but it's not that hard at all. The water doesn't even drain once you get off the buttons or something, it all stays. So yeah, after beating a very easy boss, we've rescued Army.
Both of you, this way!
After narrowly escaping the volcano, we set course for the Forgotten Island. I don't know how someone could forget this place. It has freaking living prehistoric creatures. We got dinos and other creatures. Though the music didn't realize what kind of place this is. The game does get a bit more difficult here. One thing that's gotten on my nerves about 3D Frogger games is it seems like not everything that moves is lined up evenly. So sometimes it can be hard to see the pattern and the opportunity to jump. Well, this has been an uneven franchise so far, so that makes sense here. The boss for this place, naturally, is a T-Rex. This one is doable, it can just be a drag if you die. You don't really do any kind of attacking. Just watch out for attacks and hazards and then loop around the place. Eventually, it'll eat a big bomb that looks like a fruit. Do this 3 times and it's down. The next cutscene has Frogger see what girl was taken. Turns out to be Lily. Huh.
Now it's personal.
After Dr. Wani blows up the Forgotten Island, killing dozens of dinos, we head off to the puzzling pyramid. This game has definitely been more focused on puzzles than previous games, so it makes sense here that there would be a world that's mainly focused on puzzles. Some are generally easy, but there are some that really make me scratch my head. I will say, this place has some of the best puzzles, but most aren't that fun to figure out. So given that this is a more puzzle-based world, the boss is also one big puzzle. Well, more like 4 smallish puzzles used to attack the boss's head. You have to place these mirrors in the right places to have a beam of light go through the diamonds and hit the boss's head. The only reason it may take longer is because you have to watch out for various attacks it throws at you. Afterwards, Frogger is confronted by Dr. Wani.
But if you refuse to hand over the stone, both of you will meet your doom here.
This guy sure loves saying doom. Frogger is forced to give up his gift from Lumpy, and then we head to where the weapon is at, the Sunken Temple. The game from here on gets really frustrating. Those puzzle elements amp up from here, and there's just too many things that can kill you. Seems to be a running theme. This is one of the worst puzzles in the game, having to navigate these walking things into this room. But don't touch them or you'll die. These just give me a headache. Only positive thing I can say about this world is the music is wonderful. Now, the boss isn't too bad, at least compared to what we've been through already with this whole world. You have to wait until the boss throws these little diamond things at you, but then you need to get into the right position for it to attack the boss in the right places. It's a neat idea, but it does get pretty hard by the last hit. When beating the boss, Frogger tries to save Lily, I think, but the ship she's trapped in takes off. But Army Frog encourages Frogger not to give up, which makes Frogger grow a thumb. This cutscene misleads us into thinking we'll be using other characters as well, but we still only use Frogger. Then we move on to the last world, Nebula Nemesis. This place has its frustrating moments, but it's not as bad as the Sunken Temple. Until you get to the last level. Good golly Lord Almighty, this place is super annoying. You have to navigate these bombs to these doors to get through. But remember how I talked about Frogger's slow animation that locks up the controls? Well, it's at its worst here. You have to move these platforms to make sure the bomb doesn't fall off. It's quick enough to hop around, but due to the slow animation of pushing and pulling, it's hard to keep up, despite how slow the bombs are. Oh, and the best part, if the bomb gets too close, you can't move the platform anyway. It just falls off, hardly giving you a chance. I absolutely hate this level. I understand the last level should be the toughest, but it didn't need to be this way. Well, after that hellhole, we make it to the last boss, a giant robotic frog. This is probably the best boss in the game. It's challenging, but fair. Mostly. The music is really cool, and it's just overall a good time. Whenever a red button appears, you have to press it. Then you make your way to the middle, where an electric blast hits the boss. Do all this while avoiding missiles, confusion rays, and these little robotic frogs. To destroy the little bots, you have to get them to run into each other. They somewhat mimic your hops, but they go in different directions. Frogger, I don't think that's Lily. But Frogger does save Lily, and they do this weird crap, and Frogger gets his toy back. Once back home, Frogger goes back to bed, and we see a picture of all his new pals. And that was story mode. The other modes include time attack and multiplayer. Time attack is what you'd expect it to be. Good luck on the levels with the slow animations. And multiplayer is just a bunch of different minigames. These can be pretty fun with friends. Some can last just a short bit, while others can last a while. Only one is unlocked at the start, but you unlock more when you play through story mode. All that's left is the cutscene player and artwork. So there's enough content here for a full game. And that was Frogger's Adventures The Rescue. While some of this could be just nostalgia, I really rather enjoyed this game. Don't get me wrong, it's far from being amazing due to the slow and frustratingly slow moments, but I do still think it's a good game overall. So I would recommend this game, mostly to Frogger fans, but others might get a kick out of it too.
It feels good to talk about overall good games twice in a row. So what's next? Looks like the last GBA game, Frogger's Journey. Well, the goodness couldn't last forever. Why's... I'll say. Yep. Frogger's Journey: The Forgotten Relic was released for GBA in October of 2003 in North America, around the same time as The Rescue. In a way, this is the last of the Gba Trilogy, considering it is the third GBA game, not counting Advance the Great Quest. This one was quite different for a Frogger game at the time. Not like the Great Quest different, but you'll see. Well, the music sure sounds different this time. Has a more adventurous sound to it.
I'm tired of resting.
Yeah, and I'm too thirsty to drink. Suddenly a plane lands in Frogger's lawn. An eagle named Griffith comes out to give Frogger a letter from Frogger's grandpa Phineas. Frogger then flies with Griffith to the place he came from, and now the game starts. Well, here's one major difference from the previous games. There's a hub world. Plus now, you can auto-hop. Meaning, you can just hold the directional buttons and Frogger will continuously hop in that direction. At least in the hub world. But one thing he's currently missing. Almost all of his moves. But this is just the hub world, and all you need to do here is just hop and talk to people. The way you save your game now is you go in this bar and you talk to this polar bear. I think he's a bear. When talking to the locals, they say they haven't seen Phineas in a while. Eventually, you make your way to this place owned by a guy named Dusty. He fixes things up around these parts. I think you see where this is going, but let me explain the story a bit more before we go there. We need to get into this dig site, but we can't until we find a pass to go in. We meet this vixen named Leona. After talking to her a second time, she tells us we can use her dig site pass if we can find it. Not that hard to find. Now we can head into the dig site. But before we do that, let's play this minigame called Grab Your Own Fish. So, fishing. This one works by pointing this shadow in the same direction as the fish and then pressing A when it's in the shadow. A different way to fish, but alright. Now we head to the dig site and see this guy who doesn't want Frogger to be near the place. Frogger then grabs this orb-type relic that was forgotten about. Oh, I get. We take it to Dusty and then he fixes it up. Then we start our tutorial in the basement. Now, have you already guessed what kind of game this is? That's right, it's a GBA game. Also, it's very Zelda RPG-like. By that, I mean it's a Zelda-style adventure game that has some RPG elements in it. All this going around and talking to people, this item that lets you use your moves, and things like that. It takes a long time before you finally get to a level. I guess you could say the levels are similar to Zelda dungeons, just in Frogger form. This is where you can actually use your moves you get and can't auto-hop. And this game is the first to introduce the health system in Frogger. This system is a double-edged sword. On one end, you can take more hits and don't have to worry about going back to a checkpoint all the time, unless you fall in a bottomless pit or water. On the other end, you only have one life. So if you lose all that health, you have to start the level over. At that point, I'd rather just have the one hit point and multiple life system. You can increase your max health, but still. There are also various levels you can go back to get everything. There are levels that take forever to unlock, and I wasn't a big fan of this game. There are bosses and they're interesting, but they don't save the game for me. As a kid, the game confused me because I actually had to read to know where to go. But as an adult, I just don't like the way this game plays. Going back and forth through the same places can work, but they have to be done right. While I have seen worse than this, I just wasn't a big fan. But I could see some people enjoying this game. I have beaten this game all the way through before. Not 100%, but I've beaten the story. Instead of feeling pride for beating it, I felt relief that I finally got it done. This is not a game I want to come back to anytime soon. But I do feel like it's because it's not really my type of game. If you like Zelda-styled games and you want to try out a Frogger game, then this might be a decent start. But as for me, it's not for me. This is another game where I would recommend NitroRad's video on it to get a better full review on it. Sounds like people should just watch NitroRad's videos instead of this one. Yeah, but we're already committed at this point, so let's keep going. Alright, here's the next one. It's just not going to go up much from here. Frogger Ancient Shadow the Hedgehog. More commonly known as Frogger Ancient Shadow, because that's the real name. This game was released in September of 2005 for PS2, Xbox, and GameCube.
Unlike previous games, this one actually mostly keeps the same art style as the last two games, The Rescue and Forgotten Relic. But how does it hold up compared to those two? Well, let's look at it and see. For this review, I played the PS2 version. With a name like Ancient Shadow, surely that means we went for a darker tone, right? Okay, well that's just the theme music. I bet the tone will be a lot darker. But this was meant to be an edgier time. Come on, 3 of the Giants got their first E10 rated games around this time.
Huh?
Whoa, what the holy moly, that was scary.
Hi, Frogger. Did I wake you?
So Lily talks more in this game than any of the other previous games. She tells Frogger that things have not been right around Firefly Swamp. She says she saw a suspicious shadow walking around. Try saying that really fast. Well, as usual, Frogger heads out to investigate. But before he goes, him and Lily decide to break the fourth wall.
But promise me you won't get kidnapped in this game, okay, Lily?
Well, let me check. It seems I'm okay this time.
Oh, isn't it great when cute couples do things together? So then we start things off at Frogger's house. This is basically our hub world, though it's not nearly as big as Forgotten Relics. Going into Frogger's house, we have a few things to look at, like unlockable letters from various characters and developers. Check how many coins we have, go to the load save screen, and that's pretty much it. Okay, there's a little more, but we'll get to that later. Now let's finally go into a level. After a few days of loading. Now to start practicing.
But the wallet I have can only fit so many coins, and I can't carry more than that.
Ah, we're pulling that garbage. I hate when games only let you hold so much currency at a time. Anyway, a lot of the basic mechanics return in this game, from both Beyond and The Rescue. Returning from Beyond is the vertical jump. Yay? Only this time it's more fleshed out. Now you can use that and your tongue button at the same time to grab coins and stuff. You also have a new move where you can swing on these poles. I mean, hooks? It's a cool move, but make sure you time when you let go. And as you can imagine, the push and pull mechanic is back from The Rescue. But it's a lot faster here, thank God. It can still run you into some trouble, but not as much. The end of the level is this little stone thing instead of this huge frog head. So far, I really like the way this game plays. It's an improvement over both Beyond and The Rescue. Frogger's animations are a lot faster, all the new moves work well enough, and there's just a lot to like. Oops, I lost a hit point. No, it can't be. Ah, crap! Yeah, the unfortunate truth is, they brought the health system from Forgotten Relic back. This one thing, this one eternally damned thing, ruined this game. I mean, there are other problems with the game, like some of the level design. The amount of enemies and hazards in one area. Animation and cutscenes can look pretty awkward.
Unfortunately, it's been stolen by a suspicious character. I cannot apologize enough to our ancestors.
And they brought back some puzzles that can be too hard at times, but that's mostly on me. Well, I could forgive all that if it wasn't for this frog-forsaken system. This makes anywhere I go, levels, bonus areas, and bosses, more stressful than they should be. I could get past some of the level design for certain levels, but they feel way worse simply because of the system. And in case you've forgotten, I don't hate this system because there's health. I hate it because the trade-off is you only have one life, so it's unnecessarily difficult. The most heartbreaking thing about this is, if you take out that system, you have the best out of the PS2 era Frogger games. There is quite a great game underneath its flaws. Again, the gameplay feels nice, but there's also more. You have unlockable costumes, which are mainly hats, but still. You have these bonus areas where you can play as other characters, such as Lumpy and newcomer Barry. There's also a fun multiplayer mode. It's not fantastic, but it's good. And there's the usual behind-the-scenes sketches and such. There's some references from past Frogger games. So if it wasn't for that one fatal flaw and a few other little things, this would have easily been my favorite Frogger game from the PS2 era. I have actually gotten farther in this game than I did for this recording, and farther than I did when I played it as a kid. But it annoyed and frustrated me too much, and I just couldn't handle it anymore. This game makes me sad because I want to like it. But because of that major flaw, it's bogged down to being a meh game that's difficult in the wrong, not fun ways. So I wouldn't really recommend this game unless you can really get past those flaws.
Hey, what is this? Frogger Gear Solid?
Sounds like you need to just get good.
Do you want to play the freaking game?
You know, this isn't really my part. I'll just float away from this.
That's what I thought.
Well, here's one for the DS and PSP.
Oh, now here's a slight improvement. Frogger Helmet Chaos was released in September of 2005 for DS and PSP. It actually came out just 2 days after Ancient Shadow. This was the portable companion game, or whatever it's called, to Ancient Shadow. This was also the first Frogger game to be released on DS, and the only Frogger game to be released on PSP. Now, this game on PSP has already been reviewed on Danny's Review Show. Well, to change it up a little, I'll talk about the DS version via emulation. So, let's see how it is. To be fair, I actually played through this game on DS before PSP, it's just been a while. Well, what do you know, first time I'm reviewing a DS game. It took emulation to do it, but here we are. Now this whole setup feels like this is a little kid's game, like even more so than the previous games. And starting out the story, it sure as heck feels that way at first.
Our story begins, as most stories do, once upon a time in a swamp, where there lived a frog named Frogger and a toad named Toady.
Hey, that's Lumpy!
But as we go on, it gets a little less like that. It becomes less like a kindergartner's game and more like a second grader's game. Anyway, the gameplay is pretty much the same as the PSP version, of course, just with downgraded graphics. And the gameplay overall is identical to Ancient Shadow's gameplay. So we have both a good and a bad sign. The good sign is that means it feels good to play. The bad sign is, well, if the game is like this, then that means... Yep, the health system is back. Good golly. So, as you can tell, the bottom screen is where the action is for the gameplay. The top screen shows off your health, coins, time, and points. I can't really remember if you can change that or not. Anyway, something seems different about the level design in this game. It feels better than Ancient Shadows. Well, if you have seen the DRS video about some PSP games that never made it to the PSN, you'll know that I find the health system to be much better in this game. So maybe the level design feels better due to that. But I think it's also better due to not having as many enemies and hazards around. If you're wondering, yes, the music is slower because of the emulator. There's actually multiple pathways in some levels. There could be more, but as far as I know of, there's just 2 per level that has them. This is an interesting way to make the game replayable, at least for a Frogger game. It's not like a full-on RPG, but it just has moments like that. And yes, this can result in different endings. I don't have footage of all that, but I do like that. Also, depending on what paths you take, there are also mini-games in the story. Now, this game isn't perfect, of course. Where the level design and health system are better, the health system can still be a problem. The only reason I think it's better overall here is because it doesn't take as long to increase it. But when you get into the later levels, it gets pretty difficult. Not as unnecessarily difficult like Ancient Shadow, but still. But this game does have a lot to it. I don't have footage of it, but you do unlock costumes in this game. There are also mini-games here, outside of story mode, which can be fun. And like what I said in the video about the PSP version, you can tell these mini-games were made for DS. Like the one that's set up like the original. It uses the 2 screens instead of turning it on its side. And there is an exclusive minigame in this version that has to do with using the mic on the DS. So obviously I didn't try that with the emulator due to me not knowing if it would work here. Also, if you play this on a regular DS or DS Lite, you can actually unlock some costumes early by putting in the GBA Frogger games into the GBA slot. It's a neat little feature. Also, I'm not really sure if anyone else has tried this yet, but there is a glitch where if you select a minigame with a touchscreen, they'll start up even if you haven't unlocked the minigame yet. So it seems like the DS version is the superior version, right? Well, in some ways, yes. But if you want better graphics and more voice acting, then go with the PSP version. Really, either way you play this game, it's gonna be fun. It's not my favorite Frogger game, but it is up there with my top favorite ones. So, I would recommend this game on either system. And if you use an emulator, make sure it's a good one.
Good that was another good one.
Yes, was good indeed. Doing alright there, mate? You seem tired. Just a lot of games. What's next?